Video games. They've been with us for a long time now. From the very first games, which began as simple interactive experiments, to the golden age of arcades and the early games you could enjoy in the comfort of your own home, to today's modern era of powerful gaming machines capable of running lifelike games at stunning speeds and with exceptional visual quality. They've become a defining pillar of the entertainment industry, evolving at a remarkable pace. And in their evolution, there occasionally emerges a pioneer, an innovator, a true game changer. No pun intended. Whether it was a game that introduced a new perspective on how we play, a game that gave us unprecedented freedom to explore, or a game that pushed visual capabilities to entirely new levels, becoming a benchmark for an entire generation. The examples are many. In 1998, however, one game changed the direction in which the entire industry was heading. A first-person shooter that not only left a lasting emotional impact on players, but also changed how game designers thought about making games. So let's embark on a journey to the past, to explore a game that played a pivotal role in shaping the future. Half-Life is often described as revolutionary. But why? When it first released, it was not the first FPS game. Nor was it the first fully 3D game. It was not the first game to feature realistic bullet decals, destructible environmental elements, advanced lighting effects, or a complex layered story. Even the foundation of Half-Life, its game engine, was not entirely original. It ran on a heavily modified version of the Quake engine. So you could argue that Half-Life borrowed more than just inspiration from other games. Games that had already explored many of the elements Half-Life is often praised for, sometimes earlier and sometimes just as effectively. Doom and Quake had already established fast, intense first-person action. System Shock had a rich, dark science fiction narrative. And games like Resident Evil had already demonstrated how horror, tension, and survival elements could shape how a game feels to play. So what was it that this game achieved better than any before? Well, the complicated answer is that all of the game's components worked together, flowing through the narrative without breaking the first-person perspective or the player's role. Or, I could just say that Half-Life redefined how FPS games could tell their stories. Because from the very first frame to the very last, you remained in control, experiencing the world entirely through your own character's eyes. And everything in the game, whether it was NPCs talking to you, the plot unfolding, or scripted sequences occurring, it all happened to you or around you within the environment you actively played in. This approach made the experience feel not only immersive, but also dynamic and reactive. Playing it felt familiar and entirely new. And one thing I want to highlight here are the aforementioned scripted sequences, which unfolded entirely within the game world without wresting control away from the player. These sequences did not rely on pre-rendered cutscenes or immersion-breaking camera shifts. And I mention this specifically because it was an exceptionally difficult thing to execute well, and a significant risk at the time. I mean, think about it. After investing considerable effort into crafting animations or in-game spectacles, developers naturally wanted players to notice and appreciate them, particularly when these moments contributed to the narrative. So Valve, the game designers behind Half-Life, had to employ clever techniques to ensure players were looking exactly where they needed to during key moments. Some were simple, positioning the scripted sequence directly in front of the player. Others were more intricate, using visual or auditory cues to draw attention to specific areas. While this approach had its drawbacks, the benefits were substantial, because these techniques helped maintain a seamless flow and keep the immersion unbroken. And all of this might not seem remarkable today, but Half-Life was where this approach truly began. And to be clear, the game did take obvious inspiration from the fast combat, level design, and many other elements of its predecessors, but its genius was blending them into that seamless flow. See, games like Doom, the early Elder Scrolls games, the first Resident Evil titles, Duke Nukem, Diablo, System Shock, and many others from that era are all fantastic games. They excelled in achieving one or two key objectives exceptionally well, and many excelled in these individual aspects even more effectively than Half-Life did. But that was also their limitation. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take Doom for example. While it featured an amazing soundtrack for its time and delivered fast-paced action built around a polished combat loop, its story was extremely simplistic. Doom offers very little in the way of narrative depth, environmental storytelling, or any meaningful interaction with the world itself. Progression is almost entirely mechanical. Explore, find keys, flip switches, and kill demons. Now, Doom doesn't need anything else to be immensely enjoyable, and it remains a landmark title precisely because of how well it executes this focused power fantasy. But outside of that tightly refined combat experience, there is very little supporting the world or the story. And for a lot of players, that is just not enough to stay engaging. And yes, I am aware that much of the story was written in the manual that came with the game. But there are still two big problems with that. First, the story is still extremely simplistic. And second, I don't care that it's written in the manual. I do not want to read the story of a video game I want to play in a completely different medium. I'm sure there are people who liked it, but I'm not one of them. And the manual was absolutely a choice, because even in early 90s, games did not have to rely on manuals to add a satisfying story layer. Just 1 year after Doom, System Shock approached the game design from the opposite direction. It offered a mature and layered science fiction narrative, supported by extensive environmental storytelling and complex systems that encouraged observation, experimentation, and problem solving. The world itself carried much of the story, and player interaction went far beyond simply moving through space and, shooting enemies. However, to a lot of players, this ambition came at a cost. Compared to Doom's immediacy and flow, System Shock's gameplay often felt cumbersome, its controls unintuitive, and its moment-to-moment experience far less approachable. I mean, look at this. Am I playing a game or setting up a foreign printer? You know where I'm going with this. In early shooters, if the gameplay was fast and awesome, the story was severely lacking. And if they managed to present an interesting and compelling story, the gameplay was often stale, and they often failed to use the environment, level design, or any other gameplay mechanics to support the storytelling. Instead, they relied heavily on cutscenes, which felt more like watching a movie. No mainstream FPS game before Half-Life tried to tell a single, seamless story, using every part of the experience without taking control away. And no FPS game succeeded the way Half-Life did. It's certainly not perfect, but it accomplished its goals amazingly well. With its release, or remarkably with the release of only its demo, the entire video game industry underwent a fundamental shift. And these are not my words, by the way. They are the words of Cory Barlog, the creative director of God of War 2018. So he probably knows what he's talking about.
The entire industry fundamentally shifted with the release of that demo.
He has also spoken about how experiences like Half-Life shaped his belief that single-player games should feel complete and uninterrupted, a philosophy that later influenced the immersive design goals of the same game. It truly was that groundbreaking at the time. In the recent Half-Life documentary, one of the developers reminisced about seeing many players fail to move their character during the opening sequence. They assumed it was some sort of cutscene, some accidentally bumped their mouse and were astonished to realize they could actually move in the game at that very moment. And I could not help but smile, because the exact same thing happened to me the first time I played it. I promise you it's true. I mean, every game I'd played before Half-Life either began immediately after pressing New Game, or started with a cinematic or cutscene that looked distinctly different from the gameplay. So even the opening of this game felt entirely unique. It began with a slow fade-in on what appeared to be a moving platform of some sort, accompanied by title cards rolling in. I was simply waiting for the camera to start moving and reveal the world to me. Never in a million years would I have thought that I could begin moving and witnessing, with my direct input, what the world was all about.
My God, what are you doing?
So yeah, Half-Life was only possible because it stood on the shoulders of the video game giants of its time. Quite literally in one instance. However, it used those shoulders to ascend to heights never seen before. And at those heights, unlike many of its peers, it managed to flourish, grow, and eventually evolve into something even greater.
Someone has hidden my glasses again.
One quite unique feature that Half-Life introduced to the first-person shooter genre was the nature of its protagonist. See, traditionally in games, whether focused on action, horror, or adventure, the main characters are portrayed as exceptionally tough or highly skilled individuals. You know, your marines, soldiers, police officers, detectives and mercenaries, anyone who is trained to handle danger. And in fantasy setting, it's your barbarians, mages, sorceresses, knights and similar figures. Simply put, most protagonists are incredibly strong, agile, or outright superhuman.
I did not hurt my back.
And this of course makes perfect sense. Games are primarily about escapism and enjoyment, a way to take a break from a busy day or to escape for a few hours the often harsh realities of the real world. So, when designing a game from the ground up, it's natural to create scenarios where players become exceptionally strong marines battling the spawns of hell, femme fatale archaeologists with a rocking pair of guns, or swashbuckling knights wielding powerful magic. Most people are just not that inclined to play as an everyman. I mean, yeah, there are well-made exceptions, but these types of games don't usually lead player count leaderboards. So your overpowered or gifted hero is the standard approach for most game designers. You want the player to feel empowered. However, when your game features a narrative that is more than a simplistic backdrop for the gameplay, you also want the player to relate to the characters, especially the main character. And because Half-Life is grounded in a realistic setting, with dark sci-fi and mystery elements, and because its narrative does play a central role in the experience, Valve wisely decided that the hero should be an everyman. I mean, you are basically a guy on his way to work, and on top of that, you are late, which is painfully relatable.
Looks like you're running late.
Okay, yes, he is a very smart guy with a doctorate, but the game doesn't make you perform advanced calculations, so it's fine. Now, if you haven't played Half-Life, you might be wondering, Where is the fun in being an everyman on his way to work in a first-person shooter? What is fun or empowering about that? And it's a fair question. See, there are many ways to tell a compelling story, and at its core, Half-Life follows a classic hero's journey. You start your day as an ordinary person heading to work, but when disaster happens, in this case an alien invasion, the narrative employs elements like call to action and rising to a challenge to transform you, the everyman, into a hero. The empowerment lies in the simple decision to press on and overcome the game's challenges. This type of protagonist works especially well in a story grounded in a mostly realistic setting, with fantastical sci-fi or horror elements sprinkled on top. The fact that you play as an ordinary human being helps to create a stronger connection between the player and the hero. If you were instead a powerful space marine who could chainsaw every problem apart, it would undermine the tension of the entire world of Black Mesa. I mean, being a powerhouse is fun, but it needs to fit the game and the world. And I respect Valve for making Gordon ordinary back then. I mean, imagine that. You are designing a sci-fi first-person shooter in the late 1990s, where every other successful game, and not only first-person shooters, has a strong, gifted or chosen protagonist archetype. And they work. They are fun. And they make money. But no, you have the lambdas to go against the flow, to make your hero just a guy, because you want to make something different. And they did. And not just different, but also iconic. But I don't want it to sound like Gordon works as well as he does by accident, because it was definitely not just a fluke. It's pretty clear that Valve wanted Half-Life to feel like a world that is lived in, and one that doesn't revolve just around the player. Alongside that, they also wanted a protagonist who feels like he genuinely belongs in that environment, and who is defined more by actions and context than by supernatural strength or incredible abilities. And the best part is, this idea doesn't just work on a narrative level, it works on a gameplay level too. I mean, it makes sense for Gordon to start the game with no weapons or armor and slowly build himself up from there. And once everything goes to hell, your continued survival as Gordon feels earned, rather than assumed. And this also gave Valve the space to lean into not just action, but a surprising amount of horror as well. But more on that later. So yeah, you begin as Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist on his way to work. However, this is a first-person shooter, a video game, which means there are many fun ways to help you overcome any obstacles. And I don't just mean guns, but also your trusty and now iconic HEV suit, which as it turns out offers protection from both terrestrial and extraterrestrial threats. Except of course, ladders. And this is another thing that is genuinely well thought out. I mean, Valve could have just let Gordon pick up a bulletproof vest along the way, but no. They created unique armor system, which with some logic makes sense in the environment, and again fits really well here. I say some logic because on one hand, yeah, Gordon would need some sort of protection suit, which would be orange so it's visible, and it would also have some first aid capabilities.
Major fracture detected.
But on the other hand, why does a scientist need a complex weapon stat system? Jokes aside, we all know this is a video game, and some suspension of disbelief is required. I mean, is it ridiculous that Gordon can carry an entire armory on his back? Yes. Does it make the game worse in any way? No, it makes the game better and combat more fun. And speaking of the guns, he would need a lot of them, because even though Gordon is a theorist, when it comes to an alien invasion of our world, he approaches the situation with a more pragmatic solutions. And he would have to, right? I mean, threatening the aliens with legal action if they don't leave would not be much fun, would it? Excuse me, but if you don't leave, we will sue the green out of you. Yeah, that's what I thought. Problem solved, guys, let's get some cake. What do you mean there's no cake? Anyway, another smart decision Valve made was making Gordon a silent protagonist. I discussed this in detail in my Half-Life 2 video, so now I will briefly mention that this choice significantly enhances immersion. Gordon doesn't have a voice, not even an internal one. because you become his voice. The game allows you to fill in the blanks, so to speak, and it encourages you to place more of yourself in Gordon's shoes. I mean, I love these kinds of characters, and Gordon is one of my favorites. When Half-Life first came out, I was just a kid. But as I grew older and played both games repeatedly, way too much, I began to understand them and appreciate them more deeply. I wasn't an especially athletic kid. I found science and history far more appealing. So when I had the chance to play as a smart guy with glasses who didn't need giant muscles or magical abilities to succeed, I felt a stronger connection to the character. I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing as a buff space marine. It's a lot of fun. But this unusual suspect of a video game protagonist spoke to me on a personal level, even without a voice. Almost the entire game takes place in and around the Black Mesa facility, with only the final chapters shifting to the alien dimension Zen. When it comes to Black Mesa, the game does an excellent job of introducing it and establishing its atmosphere. During the opening train ride, environmental storytelling does most of the work. You quickly realize that this is not your usual facility. Alongside scientists, offices, and industrial spaces, you glimpse an army helicopter, a rocket platform, and massive, ominous vault doors. You immediately sense that you are part of something dangerous, secretive, and, as you later learn, somewhat ethically questionable. The unease is present from the start, but it really intensifies after the fateful accident that started the mayhem. And when it comes to Zen, your first impression of it comes from the creatures that spill out of it into Black Mesa. Hostile, strange, and clearly out of place. They act as a preview of what the world represents, and when you finally arrive there, it feels exactly as you would expect, genuinely alien. Not just another planet, but a place that is strange, unpredictable, and fundamentally not meant for humans. And apart from the first two introductory chapters, your entire journey, from Black Mesa to Zen, is driven primarily by three themes: tension, action, and a theme that stuck with me the most: horror. While the Black Mesa chapters bring the horrors of survival, isolation, collapse, and loss of control, Zen introduces the cosmic horror of true loneliness, alien entities, and the unknown. I mean, even the final boss feels straight out of a Lovecraftian nightmare. Spooky, eerie, and memorable. The horror elements even seep into some of the action segments. I don't just mean the fact that you fight zombie-like creatures or horrific aliens. Take, for example, the female assassins, who use stealth and ambush against you. Their introduction is really well executed. As they assassinate a guard who attempts to warn you about something, you don't see what killed him. Instead, you only hear muffled shots, catch the occasional blur, and know that something is there with you. When I played it as a kid, and there is no better way of putting it, I was scared.
Oh dear!
The fact that you are alone there and only left with the echoing sounds of footsteps and shots chipping away at you can be quite nerve-wracking. This is what I really like about the first game in comparison to its sequel. While Half-Life 2 feels like action seasoned with horror, Half-Life 1 feels more like horror seasoned with action. And despite its age, everything in Half-Life 1 looks and feels much grittier and raw. You really notice this when you look at elements that show up in both games. Take for example the zombie design. When you look at a zombie from the first game, you can actually see an outline of a human skull beneath the headcrab's skin. It looks as though the headcrab is dissolving itself and the entire head of its victim. Such a remarkable detail that gives off strong H.R. Giger vibes. In comparison to the original design, the standard zombies in Half-Life 2 are only one step away from appearing, well, comical. The original zombies are just far more terrifying and visceral to me. The only aspects I prefer about the new ones is the sound design. The horrific screams of a person beneath sends chills down my spine every time. And it's a nice touch that these are actually screams for help, only reversed. The first Half-Life is also far more willing to lean into gore. There is some degree of gore in the sequel for sure, but here you can explode enemies into tiny bloody pieces if you want to. And it's to the game's benefit. Ew. Even the enslaved alien Vortigaunts appear more grisly, porous and, well, monstrous. I mean, originally, when Half-Life 2 was released, they still looked great, just more graphically advanced versions of the grisly ones from the first game. However, they got lost in the following updates. As they became more talkative and eventually your close allies, Valve worked on humanizing them more and monsterizing them less. And I really wish Valve had stayed consistent across the series with the design, because that raw look fitted the game's brutal energy perfectly in my opinion. What did stay consistent across the series though, is the masterfully handled sense of slowly rising rhythm. See, Half-Life doesn't throw you into these horrors right away. The start is gradual, allowing you to observe the inner workings of the game and get used to the basics. Though when the show truly starts, you'd better make sure you're ready, because it retains the old school level of difficulty. Not like most modern FPS games that treat you like a walking health station, with some exceptions of course. Despite the tough difficulty that could be challenging for some, the pacing flows smoothly, with only a few derailments. And throughout the entire narrative, the game manages to keep this constant sense of urgency, pushing you to correct the mistakes made during the fateful test. And speaking of the narrative, the story itself is presented in two distinct ways. Directly to you, through unavoidable exposition, and indirectly, through missable scenes, scripted sequences, NPC chatter, and various details of the environment. A notable example of these details appear in the chapter Questionable Ethics, where you uncover that Black Mesa had been studying and experimenting on the alien invaders even before the disastrous events of the Resonance Cascade. And of course, there's the G-Man, who observes you throughout your journey. And it's elements like these that help elevate the story from being too simplistic to being more layered and engaging. But to be fair, I have to say that they also carry another prominent element: ambiguity. Many aspects are left unexplained, cloaked in mystery or expanded upon later in the sequel. There is a sense of vagueness, sure, but it doesn't reach the overindulgent levels of, for instance, J.J. Abrams' mystery box bullshit approach.
What are stories but mystery boxes?
While this ambiguity might understandably provoke mixed emotions among players, I lean toward the belief that, at least in this game, it strikes a well-balanced note. The main pillars of the story are clear: an alien invasion caused by an experiment gone wrong, a military cover-up, and a final attempt to stop it by defeating the orchestrating entity, the Nihil-Nth. Straightforward enough. However, questions like why did the experiment went wrong, who the G-Man really is, who his employers are, or why the Nihil-Nth sought to invade Earth in the first place remain unanswered, left to the imagination or potential sequels. Too bad Valve has a reputation for struggling to conclude storylines.
I don't understand.
And you know, not everything needs to be fully explained with exposition. Certain elements are easily deduced. Take for example the elite female assassins. It is apparent they were deployed because the standard military cleanup efforts were failing. You know, if the hammer proves ineffective, you bring in the scalpel. Oh, and by the way, Valve, was it really necessary to animate their breast physics? While it's a nice detail to have, it's something players would never notice in a normal playthrough unless they used console commands like I did. So why include it? Maybe if less effort had gone into animating bouncing boobs that players normally never get to see, and more effort into other aspects, we would have gotten a better Zen. In conclusion, I think the story stays interesting and progresses steadily, and the same progression applies to the equipment you use against both alien and human aggressors, especially the weapons. There are your usual and steady choices, but because you are a scientist in an experimental research facility, with obvious military ties and under alien invasion, you get to use some fantastical man-made tools and some alien weaponry. My absolute favorite being the gluon gun. Gluon? Gluon? Nah, let's just call it a proton pack. That is another thing about Half-Life that makes me feel all warm and excited. I have a deep appreciation for science and modern technology. And much like in Ghostbusters, where the heroes combat the supernatural threat with science, here you face the alien horrors using human-made ingenuity. The aliens shoot bolts of energy at you? Here is a trusty 357 Magnum to retort. We need to close the dimensional rift to halt the invasion? Let's launch a rocket to seal it. The alien boss continues teleporting its minions to Earth anyway, and we need to reach Zen to stop it? We'll use our own damn teleportation technology to get there, while the reliable HEV suit keeps us safe along the way. See, even though Half-Life is not unique in this aspect, in many other games with similar premises, you fight the supernatural with supernatural means, or defeat aliens using alien technology. But in Half-Life, you're just a man in a lead-lined orange suit, using human resources to face the cosmic horrors our way.
Most of the simulation results are perfectly acceptable, you know.
One small positive I would like to start with is the game's approach to labeling and themes. From obvious things like calling the game Half-Life with a corresponding narrative trope, to naming expansions after scientific principles, to, of course, you playing as a theoretical physicist. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes obvious, but to me, as a big fan of science, it's a delightful touch. But now to the meatier stuff. As a first-person action shooter from the late 1990s, the game is extremely fast, and in my book, this is a good thing. Shooters from that era embraced the action aspect wholeheartedly, ensuring that the experience felt fast and awesome, as action should be. Unlike a lot of modern shooters, which usually give you a sprint button, Half-Life gives you a button to slow down. And it's a good thing it's there, because there are platforming sections where you really need it. Another positive I'd like to mention is that the game flows well because of a good pacing, but also partially thanks to the continuous level design. You remain fully immersed in the world until the ride is over. And the world you are in is a reactive one. Now, by reactive, I don't just mean the usual elements, such as bullet decals, blood spatters, breakable boxes, exploding barrels, light switches, vending machines, a working microwave, which we will not discuss, or destructible environmental features. What I mean is that the game constantly conveys, especially through NPCs, that what you do and what you choose not to do can matter here. Half-Life also lets you decide whether you want to play as a homicidal maniac, killing everything you encounter, including friendly NPCs, or whether you want to play as a true hero, striving to save as many people as possible. This is another element I wish I saw in more games like this. It adds weight to both the narrative and the gameplay when you know you can wound or kill friendly characters. Not even Half-Life 2 lets you do this, and that's a real shame. The reactivity also extends to the enemies as well. The enemy AI, especially the HECU soldiers, is excellent for a game this old. They communicate, throw grenades to flush you out, fall back, or aggressively push forward. On hard difficulty, you'll die to them often. Now the AI is 25 years old, so it's not perfect, and the enemies sometimes do, well, stupid things. But there is a reason why almost everyone thinks it's that good. Because it is that good. You'll also often witness them, and not just them but all the enemies, fighting among themselves. And it's up to you whether you want to intervene, wait it out, or just continue with your objective. And again, for a game from 1998, this is a really nice touch. But what really stands out to me is how Valve built memorable moments directly into the level design. And one of the best examples appears in the Blast Pit chapter, where you must defeat a large tentacle creature that's taken over a rocket testing silo. Everything about this sequence is just excellent. The sound design, the build-up, the opening scripted event. the verticality of the space, the branching layout of objectives. And finally, the clever way you actually destroy the thing. No bullet sponge boss fights with endless rocket shooting. You are in a rocket silo, so a test burn. It's just satisfying. It feels less like defeating a boss and more like doing whatever it takes to survive Black Mesa. And there are numerous sequences like this throughout Half-Life, moments where the game doesn't stop to announce a set piece, but quietly lets the environment, the mechanics, and the player do the work together. It's one of the best things first-person shooters can achieve, where you don't just feel like you're shooting your way through it. Also, the visual art style of the game works really well even today, especially the use of color. Everything in the Earthbound levels, whether you are inside the Black Mesa facility or outside in the scorching sun, has this rich and somewhat familiar color scheme. And everything in Zen, in nice contrast, has this sickly, pustulant shade, indicating its truly alien nature. And sound design complements all of this perfectly. Weapon sounds have weight, and music and ambience is just well done and fitting. While I personally prefer the sound design in Half-Life 2, which I consider close to perfection, the sounds of the first game have earned their legendary status. Whether through sequels, mods, or countless video parodies, their influence is still unmistakable decades later.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Overall, most elements of Half-Life have stood the test of time remarkably well. But time is a son of a bitch, and despite what some celebrities seem to believe, no amount of Botox can save you from its wrinkles. Don't do it, Barney. You look great. So yeah, the biggest wrinkles are the raw graphical details. I mean, I personally don't care much how modern a game looks, but I understand why some players, especially younger ones, do. And it's a simple fact. Compared to modern titles, the game does look blocky, the effects are basic, and the textures are low resolution. And if that is something that could stop you from enjoying the game, good news! Black Mesa exists, and we'll talk about it shortly. For now, back to complaining. Another wrinkle of the game I need to mention are the characters. While the story has its layers and is engaging enough, the characters themselves are, well, kind of non-existent. Gordon is deliberately empty so you can project yourself onto him. The G-Man, while mysterious, is more of a representation of that mystery than a character. And the supporting cast all blurs together, with scientists and security guards sharing the same models and voices. Hello, Barney 17. A single reoccurring character, with actually unique character traits, could have added a stronger sense of personality to the world, something that works better in both of the expansions. The pacing also has a couple of stumbles. On a rail chapter is one of them. Except for one fun map, it's too long, visually bland and mechanically repetitive. Built around a rail card that consistently stops so you can clear basically the same obstacles again and again. It kills momentum and becomes boring fast. But what I personally dislike even more than the rail ride is the final part of apprehension and almost the entirety of residue processing. There, Gordon gets ambushed, stripped of his weapons, and dumped into a trash compactor. Now, not only are you forced to recover your entire arsenal, which is a game trope I hate, but a large portion of the chapter is dedicated to platforming through confusing layouts. I mean, I understand why it's there, it's to ease up a bit after the previous action-filled chapters, but it still overstays its welcome. And yet none of these negatives compare to the disappointment of Zen. And it's a real shame, because the first moment you arrive there is genuinely impressive. You wake up suspended in a vast nebula space, surrounded by cosmic dust and endless emptiness. It's striking and memorable. But once that initial amazement fades, and you begin looking for a way forward, the problems quickly surface. The platforming is imprecise, gravity feels awkward, and the reduced status of it doesn't stop you from taking excessive fall damage. Not to mention the first chapter in Zen, which is only the first map and nothing else, is truly trivial. Release a few creatures, push a few buttons and move on. The second Zen chapter, which begins immediately after, is probably the strongest part of the entire Zen sequence, and that's saying something. You fight the Gonarg here, and the encounter is genuinely exciting. The first time you hear it scream, it might scare the crap out of you, as it did me. But the fight ends too quickly, and before you can fully enjoy it, you're pushed forward again. Chapter called Interloper follows, and this chapter contains some of the worst design decisions in the entire game. The opening map is both overly simple and needlessly confusing. Like, you can clearly see the exit portal and the game places these jumping vents directly in front of you, encouraging you to use them. So you do, at least the first time you play it. But they launch you too fast and too high, and because you have almost no air control, you can die repeatedly. And the vents aren't even required, which makes the frustration even worse. Success here relies far more on luck or repeated deaths than on any skill you learned along the way. And what makes this chapter even more frustrating is that it also contains a missed narrative opportunity. See, in this chapter, and only in this chapter, the alien slaves, the Vortigons, don't fight you, unless you start. This subtle detail had the potential to deepen the narrative and add sympathy to them, suggesting more clearly they're being forced into conflict against their will. But it isn't explored more or even highlighted better, and many players, myself included, missed it entirely on their first playthrough, because most of us went in guns blazing. Like much of Zen, it feels unfinished, like an idea that never got the time it deserved. Lastly, the final boss fight looks disturbing and fitting, but once again the level design undermines the experience. You are constantly under threat from powerful energy bolts that can kill you easily, forcing you to hide behind cover. And when you finally peek out to deal damage, you risk being teleported away in the middle of the fight, completely killing the momentum. One moment, you are facing a massive alien entity in a vast, dark chamber fighting for the fate of humanity itself. And the next, you are dumped into a small, dull pit, struggling through awkward platforming just to get back. And that really sums up Zen as a whole. It breaks the excellent pacing and build-up that the rest of the game establishes. Even the disturbing, eerie atmosphere cannot fully make up for how rushed and uneven this final stretch feels. Half-Life maintains an incredible rhythm almost all the way through, only to stumble right at the finish line. Oh well, we cannot change the past. But it does make you wonder what this game could have been with just a little more time.
Stage 2 emitters activating now.
Despite some shortcomings, the game was a massive hit. Valve knew they had something special and they made sure it would continue. 6 years later, Half-Life 2 arrived, running on Valve's brand new Source engine. And the new game engine gave some fans an idea. An idea that grew from a small fan-made mod into a full-scale game, officially approved by Valve for commercial release. A fan-made remake of the original Half-Life that took 16 years to finish, aptly called Black Mesa. And why talk about a fan-made remake here? Well, because Black Mesa is quite unique. Not only did it take many years to complete, with a large portion of the work done voluntarily, but it also became an official commercial release without Valve absorbing the team behind it, as is their usual MO, allowing them to grow into their own independent developers. Moreover, Black Mesa is not a simple beat-for-beat remake. Apart from updating its visuals, it keeps what worked in Half-Life and rebuilds what didn't, often from scratch. I will not go through its entire development history here, but what I want to focus on instead is the difference in sentiment it creates compared to the original. Now, before I get into it, let me state the obvious. Compared to Half-Life, the game looks great. The environments are detailed, the effects are impressive, and considering the Source engine is now pretty old, the game still holds up remarkably well even in 2026. If outdated graphics were the only reason you never played Half-Life, I highly recommend Black Mesa. It is worth every penny. Now, let's talk about the differences across two segments, the Earthbound chapters and Zen. Many of the Earthbound chapters are close one-to-one recreations, with far more attention to detail and countless visual touches, of course, which all help the world feel more believable. But in some places, like in the infamous On Rail chapter, Black Mesa expands on what worked about the original and cuts what didn't. Here, On a Rail is much more action-packed, and even though the basic progression points are the same, the new, detailed level design helps lessen the monotony of the original quite well. Apart from On a Rail, most other chapters retain the same flow, structure, and spectacle. And many of the added elements in these chapters are smaller details that generally improve the experience. From quality of life changes like reloading while charging your suit or health, to slightly larger tweaks, such as receiving the crowbar slightly later in the opening. And while we're at the beginning here, one detail I absolutely have to mention is the HEV suit activation sequence. I love it.
Reactive armor activated. Atmospheric contaminant sensors activated.
From the music that kicks in the moment you put it on, to the small display texts as the suit systems come online. It does a much better job than the original at communicating that the HEV suit is not just armor, but a complex piece of equipment. I remember seeing this for the first time. It gave me chills. And what helped a lot was the music. The score feels different from classic Half-Life, but different doesn't mean worse in this case. It's much more epic in scale and it fits better with the visual spectacle the game presents. Beyond all that, the Earthbound sections remain mostly familiar. But where Black Mesa truly gets the opportunity to shine and introduce meaningful changes is in Zen. Zen is Half-Life's biggest problem. Much of it is unfinished or outright frustrating, culminating in a final boss encounter with severe pacing issues. The Black Mesa team clearly understood that if Zen was going to work here, it needed to become something new, something better and larger, and they succeeded. In Black Mesa, Zen feels like a continuous experience, like a place that could exist, not just maps connected through lazy portal load-ins. And it has this amazing atmospheric progression. From the very beginning, you can see where you are headed, and the game constantly signals that you are getting closer to the end. This is reinforced through shifting color palettes, changing enemy types, and far smoother pacing. Also, the game eases you into lower gravity and alien mechanics, gradually building toward more demanding sections while teaching you everything you need to know. No more maps like this. The narrative also received some thoughtful enhancements. For example, you encounter a much larger presence of scientists who have been studying Zen for some time, which helps bridge the gap between the Earth chapters and Zen in a more cohesive way. But more importantly, Black Mesa fully capitalizes on the opportunity Valve missed with the non-hostile Vortigaunts. Here, you cannot overlook their plight. They are clearly shown as enslaved and oppressed, and you even see them helping you when you get stuck. This version succeeds at eliciting deeper empathy and creates a stronger narrative connection to Half-Life 2, where the Vortigaunts became your allies. I also love how you can see their living spaces with drawings, beds, and scattered utensils. This is excellent environmental storytelling and it feels unmistakably Half-Life-like. And I also cannot overlook the boss fights, which are made far more grand, cinematic and spectacular this time around, without breaking momentum. The Gonarch fight in particular is vastly improved. In the original, it simply appeared and was fought across 3 small arenas. Here, however, there is a relationship between you and the creature, and it's more dynamic. Instead of just showing up, it actively interferes with your escape, forcing you to deal with it first. That single change gives the fight far more weight, and rather than being confined to a handful of maps, the encounter becomes a cat-and-mouse chase spanning multiple and diverse locations. It even includes a secret ending where you can choose to spare the creature if you want to. Just great stuff. The Nyland fight flows much better as well. He can no longer teleport you away, which keeps the pacing intact, and the structure of the fight itself is far superior. His attacks feel more chaotic and he uses his teleportation abilities to hurl rocks, vehicles, and even chunks of buildings at you. While the Gonarch fight is longer and more varied, this final battle delivers pure spectacle from start to finish. Overall, Zen in Black Mesa is a massive improvement over the original. This is especially impressive given that, unlike the Earthbound chapters, the developers did not have a clear blueprint to follow, so well done. All that said, the remake is not perfect. Some issues from Half-Life remain, and a few new ones emerge. Some segments overstay their welcome, particularly on a rail and interloper, which did not need to be as long as they are. And the elevator ride before the final boss fight is downright excessive. But there are many more positives than negatives here, and as I said, I do highly recommend it. And before I end this comparison, there is one important difference worth mentioning. See, I believe that the most important thing a remake should preserve is the feeling of the original. I made a short video about it if you wanna watch, but back to it. And Black Mesa's atmosphere is astonishing, epic, bombastic, and cinematic, especially in Zen, with the score amplifying it beautifully. However, much like Half-Life 2, it leans more into an action-driven experience. I mean, there still are horror elements, but the action feeling is just more prevalent. The original Half-Life, flaws and all, feels much more eerie, isolating, and disturbing. Even the creature design reflects this difference, especially the final boss, which feels far more, well, eldritch in the original. So with almost any other game, I would say that because of this tone shift, the remake is worse for it. But I must admit, I think Black Mesa is both worse and better than the original Half-Life. It depends on whether you enjoy the horror and isolation of Half-Life 1 or the action and spectacle of Half-Life 2. But regardless whether you prefer the original or the action-packed remake, there is one thing that cannot be denied. A game does not inspire 16 years of mostly unpaid work and perseverance unless the original meant something truly special. And Half-Life clearly did. And Half-Life was just the beginning. After its release and players' reactions, Valve quickly realized people wanted more. But Valve being Valve, they did not want to rush a sequel. Their goal was to raise the bar significantly, and they knew that would take time. So instead, they made a smart decision. They outsourced the first game's expansions to another studio, Gearbox Software. This approach was not unusual at the time, and it allowed Valve to keep Half-Life relevant, generate new revenue, and focus their main effort on developing the sequel. As a result, players received Opposing Force 1 year later, followed by Blue Shift 2 years after the original release. Opposing Force is definitely the better of the two expansions, but it still has its problems. It's essentially an action-focused take on Half-Life. Simpler, louder, and far more explosive. The closest comparison I can offer is this. Opposing Force is to Half-Life what Rambo 2 is to First Blood. I enjoy both, don't get me wrong, but one clearly trades atmosphere for spectacle. And just like Rambo 2, this expansion suffers from overload. It keeps piling things on that did not really need piling. More equipment, more enemies, more encounters, and of course, more shooting. The gameplay itself is fun, and there are some interesting new mechanics, but the game feels like it was created by a cowboy coked out of his mind. Oh, hi Randy. The most compelling aspect, at least for me, is the story. As the title suggests, you play as one of the Marines sent to Black Mesa to contain the situation, which, as we know, goes terribly wrong. And this offers a nice parallel perspective to Gordon's story. Despite being overblown in many places, Opposing Force is still an action-packed ride with several engaging combat sequences a few solid set pieces, and a reasonably satisfying finale. The same cannot be said for Blue Shift. Now, remember when I mentioned that On a Rail chapter could become boring? That sense of boredom permeates Blue Shift almost entirely. I mean, it was originally designed as just a bonus campaign for the Dreamcast port of Half-Life, and it shows. To be fair, there are some fun moments in it, like the fact that you play as the Barney and see Gordon several times, namely at the beginning,
Hello there.
and right before he gets tossed into a trash compactor by a pair of moronic soldiers.
I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
It even has some nice character moments, and compared to the original, there are actual characters here, or at least one.
Yes, I'm Dr. Rosenberg.
The problem is that we had already seen this in Opposing Force, and unlike Opposing Force, there is very little actually new here. Plus, it doesn't help that you can beat it in 2 to 3 hours. But even though I personally don't like Blue Shift much, both of the expansions were undoubtedly a success. All that said, the most important outcome of Half-Life was not an expansion, it was something far bigger. That title actually belongs to a simple word: mods. Valve's decision to make Half-Life highly modifiable was one of the most important choices they ever made. By providing toolsets such as the Half-Life Software Development Kit, Valve empowered players to create their own experiences, experiments, and entirely new ideas within the game's framework. This openness gave rise to one of the most influential modding communities in gaming history, producing iconic projects such as Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat, Sven Co-op, or Natural Selection. And these were not just curiosities or side projects. They introduced new mechanics, new design philosophies, and in some cases, entirely new genres that would go on to shape multiplayer gaming for decades. And also, they gave countless aspiring developers their start, with several mod creators later going on to work at Valve itself. And that leads me to the one thing I really like about Valve. See, by encouraging creativity rather than locking players out, Half-Life didn't just expand its own lifespan, it became a platform, a foundation for experimentation, collaboration, and innovation that helped shape everything that came after. And there is a lot of love for this stuff from a lot of people. And I personally love Half-Life for two main reasons. First, I love it as a game. I love playing as a silent theoretical physicist, the way the world pulls you in without ever breaking perspective, the intensity of its fast-paced action, and the genuine eeriness that runs through it, especially in the unfortunately rushed Zen. I adore how it layers different forms of horror, isolation, survival, cosmic dread, and a quiet terror of an apocalyptic disaster caused directly by our own actions. But the second reason I love it, or rather respect it, is for what it left behind. Half-Life didn't just entertain players. It changed how first-person shooters could tell stories, how immersion could be sustained, and how players could feel like they exist inside a world instead of merely observing it. And beyond that, it sparked a wave of creativity and mods that became their own games. Games I spent thousands of hours playing and having fun with, creating memories that I will cherish until the day I die. And in those countless hours of playing what Half-Life inspired, I always came back to it once in a while, and it felt like seeing a really old childhood friend again. You know, with all their flaws, you still love them. So whenever someone asks me whether Half-Life is still worth playing today, despite its flaws, my answer is always the same: yes. Not just to experience a good game and have fun, but also to experience the title that was a turning point for what video games could be. Well, that's it from me. If you've made it this far, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video. If I managed to elicit even a single feeling in you, a like or subscribe would elicit happiness in me. And if you really liked it and you want to help me create more videos and more often, there's a Patreon link in the description. Well, that's it for now. I look forward to seeing you in here. Thank you, goodbye, and in the meantime, play with heart.